Hi kids! Welcome to our lesson for today. So let's start this lesson by remembering what we talked about last time. Now last time we talked about how Queen Jezebel made this plan, and this plan involved killing Naboth so that King Ahab can get his vineyard. And that's exactly what happened, and King Ahab was very happy to get the vineyard that belonged to Naboth. But then Elijah came to him and told him that what he has done is wrong, very wrong, and because of this God is going to punish him and King Ahab is going to die. And when King Ahab heard about this, he felt very sad and very sorry because he had killed Naboth to get his vineyard, and he felt very sad and upset about it, and he went and he repented and he asked God for forgiveness. So God decided that he was not going to kill King Ahab at that time. He was going to put off the time of King Ahab's punishment, but King Ahab and his family will never rule in Israel ever again because they're no longer fit to be kings of Israel ever again.
Yes, so now in our previous lesson, one of our previous lessons, we talked about how Elijah was very sad because he did not have a friend. He was not supposed to get married. He would not go to parties.
He felt he was alone.
He felt very lonely,
and there was no one else fighting for God. He felt very lonely. And then God showed him that there were other prophets who were fighting for him, that he was not the only prophet left. And then he decided that he's going to give Elijah a companion. And this companion was called Elisha.
Yes, so God gave Elisha to be his friend and his companion. So now they continued working together, and Elijah was glad that at least he had someone who would help him and who was there for him as his companion.
Yes, and Elisha, on the other hand, thought that Elijah was one of the greatest men ever to live because Elijah was brave. He stood up for God even when it was dangerous, even when it meant that his own life would be in danger. He still stood up for God, and Elisha was so proud, and he always wanted to be at least half the man that Elijah was.
Elijah, his master, was, because Elisha looked up to Elijah as his master. So Elijah was getting old, and now he knew, because God had told him that now your time is running out, you have to pass on your mantle to someone else, and that other person was going to be Elisha. So Elijah was going to pass on his baton or his mantle down to Elisha to continue with his ministry.
Yes, so Elijah knew that it was almost time for him to die. So one day when Elijah and Elisha were walking together, Elisha also knew that this was the day that Elijah was going to be taken away from him and go to be with God. Elisha knew that. But because Elijah didn't say anything about it, even Elisha
remained quiet.
He remained quiet and he didn't say anything about it. So they walked and they walked and they walked until they got to Gilgal. And when they got to Gilgal, God told Elijah to go to Bethel. So then Elijah looked at Elisha and said, "You stay here. God has told me to go on to Bethel." But Elisha said, no.
So Elisha refused to stay at Gilgal and let Elijah go to Bethel, because he said, "I'm not going to let you go alone. I'm going to follow you everywhere you go." So from Gilgal to Bethel, Elisha and Elijah went together.
Yes, and as they were getting to Bethel, a crowd of prophets came hurrying towards them. And Elijah kept on walking, but the prophets stopped Elisha and they told him, Do you know that this is the day that God has chosen to take Elijah away from you? And then Elisha looked at them and said, Yes, I know, but I don't want to talk about it. We are not talking about it, and I am not leaving him.
So then Elisha ran and caught up with Elijah, and then they continued on their journey and they got to Bethel. So when they got to Bethel, Elijah again turned to Elisha and told him, "Stay here because God has told me to go down to Jordan."
Down to Jericho.
Sorry. So because God has told me to go down to Jericho. So Elisha again said to Elijah, No. I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to follow you everywhere you go.
So then Elijah and Elisha continued their journey and they headed down to Jericho. And when they arrived at Jericho, again a crowd of prophets came to Elisha and told him, "Do you know this is the day that God is going to take Elijah away from you?" And Elisha said, yes, I know, but I am not leaving him.
Yes.
And when they arrived at Jericho, Elijah again for the third time
told to Elisha and told him, you have to stay here because God has instructed me to go down to River Jordan.
But Elisha refused to leave Elijah alone. Even that time, he said that he will go with him wherever it is that God is telling him to go. He will go with him everywhere.
Yes.
So then they went down to the River Jordan, and when they got there, Elijah took off his cloak and he hit it against the water, and the River Jordan parted,
and there was a path.
And there was a path, and both Elijah and Elisha
were
went
able to go across the River Jordan to the other side.
Yes.
And then from these children we learned that God gave Elisha to be his friend and his companion. And Elisha knew that that is what God wanted, and so he was faithful to the friend that God had given him. So Elisha remained faithful to Elijah, and he respected him as his master and as his friend.
Yes, so no matter what was happening, because Elisha knew that Elijah was going to die, and even Elijah knew this, but Elisha decided that he's going to stay.
I'm not going to leave you.
He's not going to leave him. He's going to stay and be his friend and companion, just as God had wanted him to be. So in the same way, we as children of God need to be that to all of our friends and all of our companions that God has given us in life, most especially to Jesus, because Jesus is the biggest friend that God has ever given us.
Yes. So Jesus is our friend, he's our savior, he's our companion, and we should always be faithful to him because he's our help, he's our helper, he's our friend, our companion, our savior, he's our everything. And God expects us to be faithful to Jesus the same way Elisha was faithful to Elijah. Now in our next lesson, we are going to see what happened after Elisha was faithful to Elijah. But for now, I want us to stand up and so that we can sing our song. So let's all stand up and sing this song. Yes.
So it's time for us to sing our song. Now we've just talked about how Elisha remained a faithful companion to Elijah all the way throughout his journey, even though Elijah told Elisha to go away and to stay where he was and sometimes and allow him to go by himself. And that meant that Elisha was a very good friend. In the same way, we're gonna sing about our best friend who is Jesus and how he is the best friend we could ever have. So everyone stand up and help us sing this song. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Nothing will ever change that. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Nothing will ever change that. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Nothing will ever change that. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Nothing will ever change that. 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 Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Nothing will ever change that. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Okay, kids, it's time for us to do our craft. Now, we've just talked about how Elijah was about to die and how all throughout his journey, Elisha decided to stay with him and to stick with him, and he was faithful to Elijah. And how, even though it was time for Elijah to die, there was still going to be the next prophet who was going to take up the mantle, and that was going to be Elisha.
Yes, and so that is where we get our craft from. So we are going to make a baton or a mantle, which will simply show us how Elijah's mantle was passed down from Elijah to Elisha. So this is more or less what you're going to make. It's just a roll, and you can get this from paper. I'll show you how I made mine from paper, but the other place you can get it is something like this. This is an aluminium roll, that thing that is inside an aluminium foil, yes, or a cling film. That's where I got this. So you can either use this or you can make your own from paper. So what I did is I took paper, brown paper, and then I layered it up so that it can be like firm or strong enough. Then I just made a roll out of that, and this is how I did it. I rolled it all the way down, making it balanced, just to be sure it is balanced like that. You can ask for help if you need to. And then I got something like this. Then just to make it firm and make it stick together, I stapled the edges. And then the other thing you can do, you can take your pair of scissors and just cut out the excess so that it's nice and round on both sides. So that is what I did. So this is what I did, and here you have your baton. But we want to make our baton more beautiful, and then we are going to also write what it is that we are doing. So to make it pretty and nice, I'll use aluminium foil so that I have a silver baton. So for this, I took aluminium foil and my roll that I've already made, and I just rolled it all the way down, the same way we made the first roll. That is what I did. Then the edges, I can reduce the size by cutting the excess, and then I put the edges inside the roll so that it looks like a silver baton. Then I'll also cut the excess on this other side, and then put the edges inside. You can use any other paper that can make your baton look more pretty. So I chose a silver baton, and that is how mine looks like. So if you have something like this, then you're doing the right thing. So now I'll put that aside, and I'll take a card or a piece of paper where I'm going to write what it is that we are doing. So first of all, whatever I'm doing or whatever story we are talking about is found in the book of 2 Kings in chapter 2. So that is the first thing we write. And then from our story, we learned how Elisha was faithful to Elijah until the end. And that is how he was able to even get the mantle passed down to him, because he remained faithful to Elijah until the end. So I'll write Elisha is faithful to Elijah. So Elisha is faithful to Elijah. And then what is it that we are doing? So what happened after Elisha was faithful to Elijah is that the mantle of Elijah was passed down to Elisha. So that's the next thing I'll write. So I'll say Elijah's mantle is passed to Elisha. So now Elijah is taken away, and Elisha remains to continue with the work that Elijah was doing. So I'll take a ribbon, then I'm going to staple the ribbon onto my card like that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I want to know what my baton and my story, how they connect. So I'll just take this ribbon, And then what I'll do is I'll put it inside my baton because it has to have a hole like inside. So I'm going to put it inside, and then you can either staple, you can make a knot. Just make sure you attach this card to your rod. And so mine, I'll choose to staple it.
And I'm going to tie mine around my rod.
And Shiro tied hers around her rod. So she has her silver baton and the message that says Elisha is faithful to Elijah and Elijah's mantle is passed to Elisha. So this is it. When you have this,
and this is going to remind us that the mantle was passed down from Elijah. So now the mantle is with Elisha.
With Elisha. So Elisha is the one to continue with the work that Elijah was doing after God took away Elijah. So that was our lesson today. That was our craft today. Until next time, bye.